This video is about the famous people and celebrities who passed away in 1983 in the United States. This is the second episode. Before we proceed, please subscribe to our channel to support us. Arthur Godfrey. He was born in August 1933 and he died in March 1983. His age was 79 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was emphysema. Arthur Godfrey was an American radio and television broadcaster and entertainer. At the peak of his success in the early mid-1950s, Godfrey was heard on radio and seen on television up to 6 days a week, at times for as many as 9 separate broadcasts for CBS. His programs included Arthur Godfrey on radio and television, Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, Arthur Godfrey and His Friends, The Arthur Godfrey Digest, and King Arthur Godfrey and His Round Table. The infamous on-air firing of cast member Julius LaRosa in 1953 tainted Godfrey's down-to-earth family man image and resulted in a marked decline in his popularity, which he was never able to overcome. Over the following 2 years, Godfrey fired over 20 additional cast and crew members under similar circumstances, for which he was heavily attacked by the press and public alike. A self-made man, Godfrey was fiercely competitive. Some of his employees were fired for merely speaking with those he considered to be competitors, like Ed Sullivan, or for signing with an agent. By late 1950s, his presence had been reduced to hosting his daily CBS show, which ended in 1972, and the occasional television special. Jim Match. He was born in August 1915 and he died in February 1983. His age was 67 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was lung cancer. Jim Match was an American radio actor who is most notable for his role as radio's original Jack Armstrong on Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, when his elder brother Don left his position as the host and announcer for the Chase and Sanborn Hour. In the early 1940s, Jim took over for the remainder of the show's run. He also was heard as Mountie Jim West on ABC's Silver Eagle. Other shows a Match was heard included Grand Hotel, Hollywood Playhouse, and Big Sister. In the 1940s, he had several programs on WGN radio in Chicago. He was heard on stations in Los Angeles and Palm Springs in the late 1950s and early 1960s. For many years, he was a popular local radio personality in the New York City area. By the late 1960s, he was working as an announcer on the New York's WHN and the television pitchman for Longines Symphonette Society mail order record album featuring clips of old-time radio broadcasts. In 1960s, he also read radio advertisements for Gibson wines. For many years, he was the afternoon announcer on WQXR, the classical radio station of the New York Times, and was a familiar and beloved voice. He also recorded numerous radio ads in Phoenix, Arizona in his later years. Karen Carpenter. She was born in March 1950 and she died in February 1983. Her age was 32 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was heart failure. Karen Carpenter was an American musician who was the lead vocalist and early drummer of the highly successful duo The Carpenters, formed with her elder brother Richard, with a distinctive 3-octave contralto range. She was praised by her peers for her vocal skills. Carpenter's work continues to attract praise, including appearing in Rolling Stone's 2010 list of the 100 greatest singers of all time. Carpenter was born in New Haven, Connecticut, and moved to Downey, California in 1963 with her family. She began to study the drums in high school and joined the Long Beach State Choir after graduating. After several years of touring and recording, the Carpenters were signed to A&M Records in 1969, achieving enormous commercial and critical success throughout the 1970s. Initially, Carpenter was the band's full-time drummer, but she gradually took the role of frontwoman as her drumming was reduced to a handful of live showcases or tracks on albums. In 1975, Carpenter started exhibiting symptoms of anorexia nervosa due to the severe pressure of fame and her complicated family dynamics. U.B. Blake. He was born in February 1887 and he died in February 1983. His age was 96 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was pneumonia. U.B. Blake was an American pianist and composer of ragtime, jazz, and popular music. In 1921, he and his longtime collaborator, Noble Cecil wrote Shuffle Along, one of the first Broadway musicals written and directed by African Americans. Blake's composition included such hits as Bandana Days, Charleston Rag, Love Will Find a Way, Memories of You, and I'm Just Wild About Harry. The 1978 Broadway musical U.B. showcased his works, and in 1981, President Ronald Reagan awarded Blake the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Blake's musical training began when he was 4 or 5. While out shopping with his mother, he wandered into a music store, climbed onto the bench of an organ, and started fooling around. When his mother found him, the store manager told her, "The child is a genius. It would be criminal to deprive him of the chance to make use of such a sublime, God-given talent." The Blakes purchased a pump organ for $75, making payments of 25 cents a week. When Blake was 7, he received music lessons from a neighbor, Margaret Marshall, an organist for the Methodist Church. Blake played the Goldfield during the winters from 1907 to 1914 and spent his summers playing clubs in Atlantic City. Tennessee Williams. He was born in March 1911 and he died in February 1983. His age was 71 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was accidental choking. Tennessee Williams was an American playwright and screenwriter, along with contemporaries Eugene O'Neill and Arthur Miller. He is considered among the 3 foremost playwrights of 20th century American drama. At age 33, after years of obscurity, Williams suddenly became famous with the success of the Glass Menagerie in 1944 in the New York City. It was the first of a string of success, including A Streetcar Named Desire in 1947, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof in 1955, Sweet Bird of Youth in 1959, and The Night of the Iguana in 1961. With his later work, Williams attempted a new style that did not appeal as widely to audiences. His drama, A Streetcar Named Desire, is often numbered on short lists of the finest American plays of the 20th century alongside Eugene O'Neill's Long Days, Journey into Night, and Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. Much of Williams' most acclaimed work has been adapted for the cinema. He also wrote short stories, poetry, essays, and a volume of memoirs. In 1979, 4 years before his death, Williams was inducted into the American Theatre Hall of Fame. Peter Ivers. He was born in September 1946 and he died in March 1983. His age was 36 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was homicide. Peter Ivers was an American musician, singer, songwriter, and television personality. He was the host of the experimental music television show New Wave Theater. Despite Ivers never having achieved mainstream success, biographer Josh Frank has described him as being connected by a second degree of every major pop culture event of the last 30 years. A native of Brooklyn, Massachusetts, Ivers' primary instrument was a harmonica, and at a concert in 1968, Muddy Waters referred to him as the greatest harp player alive. After migrating to Los Angeles, Ivers was signed by Van Dyke Parks and Lenny Waronker to a $100,000 contract as a solo artist with Warner Bros. Records in the early 1970s. His albums Terminal Love in 1974 and Peter Ivers in 1976 sold poorly, but later earned a cult following. He made his live debut opening for the New York Dolls and shared concert bills with such acts as Fleetwood Mac and John Cale. Ivor scored the 1977 David Lynch film Eraserhead and contributed both songwriting and vocals to the piece In Heaven, Lady in the Radiator song. Later in his career, he wrote songs that were recorded by Diana Ross and the Pointer Sisters. In 1983, Ivors was murdered under mysterious circumstances and the crime remains unsolved. Catherine Marshall, she was born in September 1914 and she died in March 1983. Her age was 68 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was heart failure. Catherine Marshall was an American author of non-fiction, inspirational, and fiction works. She was the wife of well-known minister Peter Marshall. While a junior at Agnes Scott College, she met Peter Marshall. Marrying him in 1936, the couple moved to Washington, D.C., where her husband served as pastor of the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church and chaplain of the United States Senate. In 1940, Marshall contracted tuberculosis, for which, at that time, no antibiotic treatment was available. She spent nearly 3 years recovering from the illness. Her husband died in 1949 of a heart attack, leaving her to care for their 9-year-old son, Peter John Marshall. He later also became a minister and author. Marshall wrote a biography of her husband, A Man Called Peter, published in 1951. It became a nationwide success and was adapted as a film of the same name, released in 1955. Her success encouraged her to keep writing. Marshall wrote or edited more than 30 books, which have sold over 16 million copies. In 1959, Marshall married Leonard Lesaught, who was the editor of Guideposts magazine for 28 years. Together, they founded a book imprint, Chosen Books. Marshall had 3 stepchildren, Linda, Chester, and Jeffrey. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Have a nice day.